Welcome back to MedCanada today. We have a special guest, our first guest. As usual, I'm Charlie Pimarini, physician associate, with my partner, Stephanie. Stephanie, I always butcher your last name. What's your last name?
Ochoa.
Ochoa. Both physician associates. We have our first guest is Dr. Lehfeldt. She is a physician, really in the forefront of medical cannabis, pushing education, proper education in the state right now of Minnesota. Her company's kind of got a wide footprint, but thank you for joining us and kind of go a little bit about what brought you into cannabis, because we're all medical professionals and there is nothing ever covered in medicine about the endocannabinoid system and about cannabis. It's always been the devil, right? And so kind of what brought you into this field, because it's so interesting and how you've really taken a hold in this.
Yeah, well, thank you, both of y'all for having me so much. I think I mentioned to both of you, I got to listen to some of your other podcasts and just so impressed with what you're doing for the PA community. We need you guys in medicine. We need you guys in cannabis, and just so happy that you guys have this space and this voice that is so needed. I was listening, to the podcast, and Stephanie was saying how she went to the Cannabis Science Conference and really didn't see any representation of PAs there.
Right.
And just like, a few years ago, there weren't any nurses. A decade ago, there weren't any doctors.
Right.
And it's really doing, patients a disservice. And so wrapping it back around, that's absolutely why I got into cannabis.
Right.
I graduated from med school, not to age myself, but relatively recently. And the only thing that we were taught about cannabis is how to recognize, intoxication in the emergency room.
Right.
And this is ridiculous, because we know very well that there are, millions of Americans that are utilizing this plant and have been doing so. We've co-evolved with this plant.
Right.
So, with my background in mental health research, was kind of becoming a little bit, frustrated with Western medicine, kind of single agent pharmaceuticals that we have been using, for the past 100 years. It's, and then pairing that now, with the epidemic of anxiety and other mood disorders, it's imperative that as physicians, we really have, and physician assistants and nurses and pharmacists, and really everyone has the knowledge about this plant that's really able, with 1,000, we call it the plant of 1,001 molecules.
Right.
This is what my mentor, Dr. Stephen Dahmer, has instilled in me, right? It's not just this one lock and key mechanism that occurs with cannabis, right? We have cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, esters, all
that's the beauty of it.
So many different. Totally. So it's, a bit inane that it has so many different medicinal properties and really the ability to treat, multiple sclerosis, spasticity, to anxiety, to PTSD in our veterans. There's no other pharmaceutical that really has that scope. So again, the education is needed so much. And that's really kind of what I've dedicated, my life to at this point. And I know both of you have as well.
Yeah. And that's amazing. That's kind of, the complexity of the cannabis plant is both, a pro and a con to it. Right. I think, in medicine, we're taught, right, lisinopril treats hypertension. Atorvastatin treats high cholesterol, right? We're taught a single molecule for a single, disease state. And cannabis has, hundreds of active cannabinoids, hundreds of active terpenes and flavonoids and all these other compounds that we don't even know about yet. And so I think that's what really turns off a lot of other medical professionals to this, is because they're used to giving one pill for one problem and you move on.
Yeah.
This can't be a pill, right? And I know there's CBD capsules and there's isolates and stuff, but still the biggest benefit for this plant, and you know that better than anybody, is taking this plant as the full spectrum, as full as you can, if you can or can't have THC. But I want you to really, highlight what you're at your current role, kind of explain what you're doing and explain how, your goal with this company and your mission as what you're doing. Like, what are your, next couple of your goals? Like, are you looking to see if you can team up with medical schools to get this education, in the training, right? And just even giving one lecture about cannabis and CBD could really help someone, even if you don't like cannabis, right? And you don't believe in it, but at least you have to understand it and you respect it. So what are some of the goals that you guys are looking for? Like big term goals, long-term goals for your company?
Yeah, I always say when you get into cannabis, you come in. I came in as a physician, as kind of a researcher and a scientist,
Right.
and it's not enough in
Right.
the cannabis industry. I have to wear so many different hats. I'm a minority female in the industry, so I've really dedicated a lot of the work I do to social equity and restorative justice initiatives, which is the reason that we as healthcare providers do not have this in our toolkit. So really
Right.
speaking about that to physicians as well, almost in all lectures I do. Have done some of the greatest things that, with regard to education, which both of you are already doing, is to really expand continuing education. So
Right.
I've done continuing education, 3 hours for credits for licensed mental health care providers through the DC Psychological Association. At Goodness Growth, which is the company I work for, we hosted a 6 hour day long continuing medical education program where
Awesome.
healthcare providers in the state of Minnesota could get actual credits for their licenses from, a very curated program from subject matter experts such as yourself, but really that small scale. I want, like you said, Charlie, I want all medical schools to have this in the curriculum, right? I always say it's like our boards, USMLE, I'm sure you have the alphabet soup for your boards too.
Right.
We're tested system based. We're learned system based. One semester we learn about physiology, pharmacology of the cardiovascular system. One semester it's we're learning immunological, all of the above. And I always say it in medical school. It's like I just don't show up for the semester they teach about the cardiovascular system, but I'm asked to treat hypertension,
Right.
CPA, all of the above. But it's the same thing, right? We're not taught about the endocannabinoid system.
Right.
We're not taught about this basic physiology when we know from Meshulam and all of the godfathers and
Right.
godmothers of
Rest in
cannabis
peace.
before us, that yes,
Yeah. Rest. Right.
RIP, that not only do we have these receptors in our body, not only do we have exogenous cannabinoids which can treat clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, but that these receptors play a huge role in many of these disease processes, which we're treating again with these single agent pharmaceuticals when we have this much more nuanced way to treat, to not go lock and key into the receptor, to treat an ancillary receptor, to work more gently on the body, especially in the aging body.
Right.
We that our elderly really need it. So to answer your question, to really have this available in medical school curriculums for those
Mhm.
that don't have it available in CME, I'd love to see it integrated into AARP. A
Yeah.
lot of our veteran organizations, but most importantly to me is really getting this to our mental health care providers, which really are going to be overburdened and overwhelmed, especially in post-pandemic life right now. And we've seen firsthand, with your CBD company, I'm sure, how cannabis really is impactful on various mental health diseases.
Oh, for sure.
And the
For sure.
schools are open to it because I actually approached my PA school about adding a lecture on cannabis, and they were up for it. They
Awesome.
agreed. So,
Yeah.
Yes, it
mhm.
should be.
As they
How many of your patients are with women's health, Stephanie? How many of your patients are already utilizing cannabinoid-based medicine?
So I'm traveling now. So in California, a lot more patients are using cannabis than maybe like Florida. But yeah, I would say about 50, at least 50% of
Wow.
them. Hmm.
Mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
lot.
What about you?
Um, in family practice, it's kind of few and far between. When I was in pain management for the last 5 years, that was, I would say, 50 to 60% of people either are currently taking it or were actively trying it, and that's what brought me into CBD and cannabis, was watching
Cool.
just the crappy effects that patients were getting from crappy products. Failing drug test, even though it said it was THC free, THC free on
Uh,
it and stuff. So um, yeah, I think, Stephanie, obviously you can relate with her as, being a minority
Hmm.
woman in, basically me and you are kind of we're really the trailblazers kind of in our field as PAs. Um, how do you see this really kind of tying into, because, cannabis and marijuana have such a rich history with, Mexican Americans and minorities, right? And the prosecution rate and all these certain things, like, I think that really plays into the stigma of why mainstream doctors and medical professionals really don't want to touch it, because it's such a it's such a minority driven field that people want to stay away from it, right? And so what do you think, Steph? Like how do you think, like, a lot of your patients take to it, a minority female talking to them about cannabis?
So it's hard. It's hard because of the stigma, and so most of them are afraid to ask, or even if I mention it, I have to
Right.
like sugarcoat it. And I'm always
Right.
like, it's, like I talk about CBD and I'm like, it's the sibling of marijuana, I kind of like talk it
Right.
down and they listen, but it's just also like a religious thing. A lot of them are very Catholic, so they are not
Right.
interested. I think in the other episode I told you that I was giving my grandma, and she says it works and she takes it, and she's religious, but she's like, anything to not feel this hip pain. So she'll
Right.
take the
Right.
tincture. And so for me, as far as like going back to what you originally said, as far as being a minority in the field, it actually motivates me, and it
Okay.
keeps me going, honestly. I want to be the pioneer in the PA community. I want to be a pioneer as a female, pioneer as a Hispanic woman. It motivates me.
Wow. Yeah, and I think that's awesome that all of us are coming together and
Yeah,
joining, forces to,
agreed.
to push this narrative, right? And I think it's important because I feel like medicine right now is so fractured, and there's all of these things of like PA versus nurse practitioner versus doctor versus nurse and all these things. I really like that this cannabis space is kind of cannabis is always like so welcoming. Everyone's like, come in, right?
Yeah.
Let's all go together because we're fighting a common enemy of stigma, big pharma having their hand in this, the government really, squashing a lot of these things. And so I think it's just awesome that we're all kind of playing in the sandbox really nice and playing together.
And I think for the most of us, or the majority of us, I'm sorry, it's about helping the patients feel good and feel better, right? Because that's what they're looking
Right.
for. Like they're tired of being lied to. They don't
Right.
want to take another pill because they're already taking three. They see the side effects. So they're just losing faith in traditional medicine. And so some clinicians have
Right.
to wake up and learn about other alternative medicines. And I think that's how we connect.
Right. Yeah.
Totally. It's not about finding a cure. It's about improving
Right.
quality of life.
100%.
A lot of these a lot of these drugs that are being prescribed do the exact opposite. You talk about the prescribing cascade.
Right.
It's really not rare that you have a patient that's 70 or above that's on 10 different pharmaceuticals.
Right.
No longer treating the original disease or ailment, but treating the side effects of the pharmaceutical.
Right.
And it's, why are we doing this when there is, a viable alternative? Of course, it doesn't work for everyone, but really, I think we've all seen firsthand that it really, really helps a lot of people.
It does. And I think so in pain management, obviously a vast majority, probably 80% of my patients were, advanced age. And so one of the things I want to ask you is, how do you deal with when a lot of these elderly patients come in? Because a lot of them would come in and they say, hey, I went to the dispensary, because in Arizona, it's both recreational, so it's adult and medical. So you can just walk in. And they walked in and the bud tender said, they're like, hey, I've got hip pain. My nephew said to try this and I want to try it. And they try it. And the bud tender, right, I know they're bound by very limited what they can say legally, but gives them some strain. And all of a sudden they're like, I was so high, and it scares you, right? Like they were so super scared. And so how do you feel moving this forward? How do we really circumvent that fact where the bud tenders are kind of like almost like the gatekeepers for people that are looking for help in a very, very complex plant? And we're kind of left on the sideline, right? Just kind of how the whole system's set up with bud tenders sitting there as kind of the gatekeepers. And so how do you feel like that's going to really change? And how are you working on changing that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that they're the gatekeepers, and they're some of the most knowledgeable folks that I know, that they've really, been in the industry for so long and are super passionate. We're active in 4 states, and we have our bud tenders go through a robust training program,
Right.
hours and hours, so that they really get to know about the plant. I also think so the education is so important, beyond, I think what we all say is start low, go slow, and
Right.
stop there.
100%.
And that's not fair to the patients. That's not fair to the people in front of the patients. So I think active dialogue is the way to do it. The healthcare providers having that relationship with the bud tender and the dispensary, so that they know that they're not just sending their patients out into the West, the wild, wild West, to kind of get whatever has the highest THC that's in front of them on the counter, but to really have that open dialogue. Again, this goes back to education, because a lot of the times the providers just don't know and kind of see bud tender, or if there's a pharmacist there,
Right.
which there isn't all the time,
Right.
to see them. So again, the people that know the most about cannabis a lot of times are the bud tenders. And a lot of times that stigma with the physician or the healthcare provider not wanting to have that conversation with the staff at the dispensary is really doing no one but their patient a disservice. So putting that power in their hands, but also making, having that dialogue about dosing, about contraindications, about drug-drug interactions
Right.
with the staff is so important, especially, as you mentioned, for some of our elderly patients.
Yeah, and I think there's a dispensary here. I don't know if they still do it, but I think they had like a nurse on site that would kind of be able to answer some questions, which I think is a great, step in the
Yeah,
right direction.
that
Totally.
sorry. So that's actually one of my
Go ahead,
favorite
Steph.
things about Meriden, that there's a clinical director at dispensaries, and I had never really seen that. I think there's Nurse Laura. She founded like the organization for clinical directors, and I love that concept. Virginia also, it's a little different because Virginia has pharmacists on site, but I think that that's great also because they're the ones that, study the
Yeah.
interactions of all the medications. So if there's anyone that I want to review my meds, is a pharmacist.
Absolutely, because we
100%.
lose that extra touch. And thank you for plugging Nurse Laura and Nurse Dawn Marie Steenstra. They have a national clinical director consortium.
Oh, cool.
I can never say the word. It's nationalclinicaldirector.org, and they do just that. They kind of provide that extra touch that we have in traditional healthcare to kind of liaise between the patient and the bud tender and the certified provider. And again, that's so important. And unfortunately, we're just not seeing
Right.
that on a national level. But yeah, Maryland does have a clinical director that needs to be there for now before it goes to adult use. And again, that extra touch to avoid some of those horror stories, like you mentioned, Charlie, is so
Right.
necessary.
And I think just strictly from a business standpoint, I mean, yes, from an ethical standpoint, you want to give, you don't want people to get bad results, but from a business standpoint, don't you think you'd like to have somebody on staff that's knowledgeable, that's going to help coach these patients correctly, so then they're going to want to come back and they had a good experience, right? And I coach my patients and I'm saying, hey, you may not feel anything for the first couple of weeks, but slowly titrating up is way better than overshooting and you landing on Mars and you never
Yeah.
Yes.
trying this stuff again, right? And so I think just from a business standpoint, it makes sense to have PA and MD and nurse, somebody or pharmacist to be there and be like, hey, let's try this. Let's try this strain that we have in house. It's great for this. These are the ratios, right? And this is how you're going to use it. And take an edible, wait an hour, don't take another one yet, right? And so I think that's huge. And Arizona doesn't have that, unfortunately, that requirement. But that'd be
I,
nice to see. So yeah,
Let's
I
bring
wish
it
that
back.
they would do it nationwide.
yeah,
They should.
right, right,
Absolutely should, because I think everybody, I mean, I'm a medical patient in Maryland. I think it's incredibly overwhelming, even for me, to go in and see all these different products and not really knowing exactly what to take.
oh
I think
yeah,
we've all heard those horror stories. And Charlie, I love that you really, are consulting and guiding your patients through the way. And I think one of the best pearls of wisdom I've ever heard from a patient or spoken with is that you don't have to feel high for the medicine to really have its effects.
right,
Right? You're like, oh, it's not working. You're
right,
not going to feel when you're, as you mentioned, lisinopril
right,
is low
yeah,
your blood pressure, right? You're not going to necessarily feel anything to really experience the medical effects. And it's so important to really know that, so we don't go to that place where you do take too much, get paranoid, and never come back again.
right. And yeah, it's the field is so. This is just an interesting field, right? And that's what kind of brought me in, being a science nerd. I have my master's in physiology, and I just love the human body and I love the interactions, right? And all these receptors. And I'm like, you got to tell, you're kidding me, right? I went and when I started my journey, I was on PubMed. I literally put in cannabidiol, and lo and behold, 3,000 articles pop up. And I'm like, wait, whoa, whoa. You got to be telling me I went through PA school, I went through a master's in physiology, and not one mention of the endocannabinoid system,
Isn't
not
that
even one.
crazy?
And the effect that the endocannabinoid system has on homeostasis and embryo development, right? And all these things, like, you failed to mention this, an entire
Yes.
body system. And so I just hope along with nutrition. We need to teach nutrition a lot more in medical school and PA school, because we had like
Yeah,
one lecture in the
We
person.
did
like 2 hours.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And the way she was telling stuff, I was like, I don't think any of that stuff that's outdated. um,
Right,
uh,
right. It's even like a supplement lecture. I think we had an hour on it as
right.
well.
Right. And I
And
think
how many
that,
Americans are on 10 different supplements right now? I mean, GNC is
right. Right.
doing pretty well. So
Where do you,
yeah, it's
where do you,
again.
where do you see in the next like 5 to 10 years, the whole cannabis industry as a whole kind of going towards like legalization? Do you think it's going to be just a scheduled narcotic? What are you kind of seeing? What are you thinking?
It better not be a scheduled narcotic, Charlie. I mean, like when I came in, 5 years ago, I think we were saying, in 5 years, it's going to be descheduled. I'm not for rescheduling. I'm a hardcore descheduler.
Yep.
I don't think it should be on the Controlled Substance Act at all. Again, for reasons, the reason that's there is for, very xenophobic and racist reasons in the country.
Right.
And it doesn't have a place there. I mean, the Controlled Substance Act is so, scheduling is so antiquated. I mean, oral opiates are Schedule 2, while cannabis is Schedule 1.
Yeah,
well,
right.
Epidiolex is like all the way down. So
Right.
it makes no sense at this point. And again, another hat that you have to wear, not as a social activist, as an educator, as a
Right.
scientist, but as a real policy wonk. You really
Right.
have to get to know the policy to figure out kind of, and I know that you were talking about it as well, but I really hope, if it's not descheduled in 5 years, it's going to be ridiculous. We might be closer to 10. I mean, we're lobbying for Safe Banking Act right now. We don't have access to safe capital in the United States.
Right. And that's,
And so,
and the
baby steps.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing, like owning a CBD company, finding a bank that would even just take me. I was like, what, CBD's from hemp? Like, this is a hemp derived. I have lab reports. And I literally went into Fifth Third's bank, and they're like, oh, yeah, we'll take you. The next day I get a phone call. Oh, your account's been shut down. Come and get your money. I'm like, wow, okay. And then finding credit card processing, and they charge you insane rates, right? And it's like, I get it. It's all the fly by nights that really give a bad name for everybody. But it's just crazy that we're in this industry that it's still federally illegal, right? Like the federal government's just kind of sitting there in the background looking at everything and waiting to see what's going to happen. But all the states are saying it's okay. But I tell my patients, my DEA number is a federal number, right? And so like, you're stuck in this like gray area. You're like, you don't really know what to do, what you can do, what you
It's
can't say,
hard.
what you can't say.
That's what
And
it
I
took
think
me a long time to come out as a
it's very
provider,
hard.
because I was like, do I do it? Do I not do it? Because you got scared. There's a very, very fine line.
Yep.
But actually, when
Oh,
I
yeah.
met you, you motivated me to come out and do it. I was like, you know what? Actually, both of you.
Oh, good.
Charlie, he's the one that motivates me. But Paloma, when I met you at the Cannabis Science Fair, I was like, you know what? I need to do this. Like, you really, yeah, you really, really motivated me after I
Good
met you
for
at
you.
that conference.
That's awesome.
I really appreciate that. I mean, it's really, I think that life is about the
Yeah.
connections that you make and
Yep.
the people that you learn from. And I feel like it's, symbiotic there, Stephanie. And like, I think it's totally, the people in the industry are all, about the same thing, especially the healthcare providers, and that's wellness and
Right.
really helping people. And, I think everyone really shares that credo. And that's why it's so important that, we deschedule, we have this available on boards, it's destigmatized, it's decriminalized, and it, is treated as it should be, as a medicinal plant.
What would you say? So I was, I don't know if I was reading something or someone told me they think that Biden's going to put it on, go from Schedule 1, which if everyone doesn't know, Schedule 1 narcotics basically state that there's no medicinal benefits. So it's heroin, LSD, PCP, meth, which is where cannabis is and is considered a Schedule 1 narcotic. Schedule 2 is like oxys and opioids. So someone was saying that they're thinking that Biden may kind of put it into a different schedule, which means that we could write a prescription for it. Do you think that's a step in the right direction, or do you think that just kind of pushes us in like kind of a gray area?
So there are a few different camps there. Yeah, Biden was talking about rescheduling.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm a hardcore descheduler because I really don't think I don't think any plants or natural plants belong on the Controlled Substance Act. I just
Right.
really don't. and maybe that's a little bit hippie of me. Fine, that's cool. I'm totally okay with that. But no, to reschedule it is still saying this is a drug, and this is not the case. One, two, it's still going to have incredible barriers to research, to the randomized control trials that we so desperately need, so we can pursue something similar to an FDA path. Of course, it's not going to be the same, but in order to really get that evidence-based medicine available to clinicians, not putting it on Schedule 3 is just going to hinder that research, and then we're going to have to go back to UMIS and use crappy weed that is so far from what patients are utilizing in America today. So it's just going to be a unnecessarily high mountain, when really, the answer is let it be, deschedule it, bring it back. It used to be in everybody's medicine cabinet in the 1850s. It was used for leprosy,
labor. We talked about it last episode.
Nausea and stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, you should be able to go to CVS, get your Advil, get your cannabis tincture, and go home.
Yeah, we've got legal meth in Adderall that people outwardly brag about taking, but if you mention that you take cannabis, you're kind of ostracized. And I'm speaking. I told when Stephanie and I kind of first met. I'm speaking from such a different perspective, because I don't use cannabis. I mean, I use cannabis because I use hemp, but I don't use marijuana. I use just a full spectrum CBD tincture, and I see amazing benefit from it. But marijuana for me, I've taken it. I didn't like it. But I like CBD, and I love CBD, and I love full spectrum CBD. And so it's so fun because I get to come from such a different perspective, and I push it from the science and from equity and from benefit and just anecdotal benefit, but also from science and research. And people are like, oh, there's no randomized controlled trial for this, and it's not blah blah blah. And I'm like, how how many medications you write on a daily basis that are off label? Right. And yes, there's efficacy and there's data and safety data, but there's safety data for cannabis. No one's ever died from an overdose of cannabis. But yet you're writing, gabapentin off label, and there's lethal doses of gabapentin. Right. And so you're telling me that, cannabis is going to really, it's that bad.
I agree with the descheduling, because I think it would remove the fear of talking 100%. About it, like as a provider. Right? Because rescheduling, you still have to be careful. You're still going to have to follow some type of protocol. We're still going to be scared. So I do agree that descheduling would probably be the better route. I had agreed with you last episode, Charlie, but now listening to Paloma, I'm like, you know what? That's true. Because I mean, sure, I could maybe learn a little more about it, by it being rescheduling, because then they're going to force you to take a course before you renew your DEA license. Sure. But ultimately, what we want is to be talking about it freely and not be judged and not get sued.
Well, 100%. Well, Dr. Paloma, I got a question. So your background's in psych, correct?
Psychiatric research.
Psychiatric research. So can you tell me, you may not know the answer, I don't know if anyone knows the answer, and I think we know the answer is, why was buprenorphine an X waiver, and I had to take extra training for something like that instead of no extra training for now you have like a 2-hour CME course, but I had to take a 12-hour course in order to write Suboxone, right, with naltrexone in it that inhibits overdoses, but I could freely write all the oxys that I want, all the fentanyl that I wanted. Do you know why?
No, but I mean, that's the same question as why can your patient go pay $6 at CVS, get a bottle of opiates, but has to pay $200 uninsured dollars and get their cannabis? I mean, it's those kind of questions that just make you go.
Yeah. Right. And so in your research, how are you seeing patients respond to cannabis? Because I get some people that are scared with, high THC and psychiatric breaks. I listen to a lot of Joe Rogan, and he talks about, there is some correlation. It's not, causation, but correlation between THC and causing somebody that already had a propensity for, schizophrenia to kind of have a break, but it doesn't give you schizophrenia, right? Is that kind of how it works?
Right. No, and a lot of that, I'm glad that you made that distinction. People that are predisposed to schizophrenia, when they take cannabis at a younger age, they'll usually make their age of onset less.
Oh, okay.
So if someone's predisposed or has a familial history, which we always say is an absolute contraindication
Right.
to using cannabis. It can exacerbate age of onset. It can, put on a full-on psychotic episode prior to the actual diagnosis. However, it's people that aren't predisposed are not going to become schizophrenic from
Right.
using cannabis.
You're not
no
going to
matter
catch
what.
you're not going to catch schizophrenia from taking cannabis.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
But also, and people should not be, we're all cannabis advocates here, but there are absolutely some people that should not use cannabis.
Right.
And that's one group that shouldn't, people that have bipolar 1 should not use cannabis. People with severe cardiopulmonary disorders, people under the age of 25 should really, and I'm talking about THC specifically.
Right.
And that's the distinction we have to make too, right? Because we've seen CBD work amazingly for antipsychotic properties, but THC unfortunately has the opposite effect.
Right.
And again, this is why it's so important for us to really, speak about this, be educated on it. But yeah, no, that's just another, I think that's a dare, something they put into our head. Cannabis is the gateway drug. Cannabis melts your brain. Cannabis causes you to be crazy and have schizophrenia and be lazy.
Right.
I was giving a lecture. I was giving a lecture to college students, I think a couple of years ago, and they were like, doesn't cannabis make you lazy? And I was like, are you calling me lazy?
It has nothing to do with it. If you're already a lazy person,
no,
then
it
yeah,
doesn't.
sure, but it's not going to make you lazy.
Right. I think, who did the war on drugs? Was it Nixon?
Everyone did the war on drugs. One of the main guy who really started is Henry J. Anslinger.
Yes.
In 1937. Don't ever Google his YouTube videos because he's a horrible person. I don't hate a lot of people, but he's up there. But yeah, incredibly racist guy. Some of the things he said are completely deplorable, but he led the way for Nixon and then Reagan and some of the.
But they did. When they commissioned the study on cannabis, I don't know if it was in one of the textbooks. Steph and I took a course, and they talk about the commissioning of the federal government gave this guy to study this, right? And he comes back and he goes, actually, it's not that bad. It's actually going to do more harm if you make it illegal than if you just keep it the way it is. And they said, yeah, to hell with you. It's illegal now, right? Yeah, they ignored him.
Question. I had a
PA,
a psych PA approach me and tell me that she was absolutely against cannabis use for all psych diagnoses, including depression, anxiety, insomnia. It was like maybe last year. I didn't really have the knowledge to back myself up. So what do you tell providers that are completely against cannabis and with psych?
With psych, I say, we don't have RCTs in the United States, but we do in other countries. There's a great study, University of Kyoto, that I always share for anxiety. There are a lot on structural changes, and they did a structural PET scan in PTSD patients versus trauma patients who didn't make the PTSD criteria versus control. And they show structural changes in CB1 receptors, as well as a change in anandamide. And this is one of my favorite studies. It's from 2013. This is a decade ago.
Right.
So this is research, and this doesn't need to be an RCT. These are structural changes in the brain.
Right.
I can post it on our page.
Share it with you.
Yeah, please do, because we get a lot of. I'm getting, I don't know, did you tell her I got accepted to speak about cannabis and CBD as an alternative for pain management?
I'm so excited for him. I'll be there.
That's awesome.
I'm the cheerleader.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I don't know, are there any other PAs that have ever spoke pro-cannabis at any of these associations? I don't know.
Because you go on a lot of them, right? You speak on most of them, don't you, Paloma?
I go speak in like industry stuff, like Lucky Leaf, USA CBD Expo. Yeah, I kind of speak in the industry. I teach lay people like how the endocannabinoid system works and why CBD works at this receptor.
Critical.
It's gonna be different presenting to your peers when they're like, when I have to describe a GPCR, right? G coupled protein receptor. break it down to a layperson, but when I can just say it to another PA colleague, and they're like, well, actually, the microtubule
But
transmission of, and you're like, all right, dude, I get it.
But no one's going to know about the endocannabinoid system. No one's going to know about retrograde neurotransmission.
Right.
I mean, all really cool molecular bases that
awesome stuff. Yeah.
Like a whole new world.
Right.
You're a physiology guy. I mean, how much can you geek out with other physiology people about retrograde neurotransmission in the endocannabinoid system? I mean,
yeah, right.
Right?
Did you find the paper?
I did. It's called Elevated Brain Cannabinoid CB1 Receptor Availability in Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, positron emission tomography study,
Wow.
in molecular psychiatry in 2013.
Oh, wow. Okay. How many participants?
I have this written in my slides. I do not.
You don't?
Yeah. Can you?
Well,
But I will.
I mean, it's published, so that's fine.
Let's see. Okay. PTSD group 25, non-combat trauma histories and trauma 12, and then the healthy controls was 23. So that's a pretty significant N.
Yeah. If you want to, can you send me that paper when you get off, and I'll put it in the show notes, and so people can kind of reference it, and what Steph and I always try and do is talk about the good and the bad, right? There is bad things, not just industry wise, right? Like the difficulty of growing the plant and the different variations, but what do you see patient specific wise, besides the ones that you just, schizophrenia and bipolar 1 and stuff? Who do you really feel strongly against using cannabis? Is it just kind of that subset of people? Or are there other people that you really suggest, please don't use cannabis?
Oh my gosh. I mean, well, people with polypharmacy need to be very careful with their CBD because the cytochrome P450 system. So that's something they really need medication management with their healthcare provider. People with a history of severe addiction can sometimes suffer from cannabis use disorder.
Okay.
A lot of people are hush-hush about cannabis use disorder, but it is something that's there. And we also need to be educated about that because THC can be addictive when used in high concentrate forms, when inhaled sometimes. So again, really it works on the reward pathway like many other drugs of abuse. Of course, as we mentioned, the mental health conditions, there is cannabis hyperemesis disorder, which we speak about a lot. People that just have adverse reactions and intractable vomiting should not be using it. Pregnant and lactating. Again, this is a very controversial topic, but ACOG is really the gold standard here and are really saying until we have more information, we should avoid it if possible. Of course, we don't have black box warnings or anything along those lines with cannabinoids. It's something that absolutely needs to be studied more because we see a lot of patients that are utilizing it.
Right.
Who am I missing? Again, severe cardiopulmonary disorder should absolutely stay away from inhaled. Anyone with a history of asthma should really try to avoid inhalation methods and stick to PI based. So there's a significant amount of people that really should avoid certain formulations, certain cannabinoids, but for the most part, not for the most part, but again, for a lot of folks, we know that it's very beneficial.
And I think we've touched on it before, and Steph and I touch on it quite frequently. I've touched on it in my other podcast, and I say, even if you don't like cannabis, you at least need to respect it as another supplement or medication that people are using outside of whatever you're writing. And so you at least need to have some type of knowledge about it, right? Interacting with warfarin and Plavix, interacting with your antiarrhythmics, and interacting with your anti-seizure medications, right? And so I just think it does a disrespect. Even if you don't like cannabis, you don't have to love cannabis, but you at least have to know, like, hey, I don't write opioids every day. Yeah, I don't write opioids every day, but I understand what the opioids do and how they work and stuff like that, right? And so I think just utilizing that approach and kind of what you're doing and what your goal is with your company. And are you guys looking to expand across the country to states such as Arizona?
We were in Arizona back in the day, but yeah, I mean, we're a Minnesota company. Minnesota only has 2 medical companies in the whole state. So that's really our home base, called Green Goods there. And yeah, we're just really focused on improving safe access to cannabinoids, especially now that we go to adult use, right? This is a whole other issue that we see the illicit market
Right.
really taking off. You mentioned, a lot of the products are testing hot for THC, which is a disservice to patients. A lot of them don't even have
Yes.
CBD in them. We can talk another hour about synthetic cannabinoids,
Right.
Delta 8, the other ones, THCO,
Right.
and the issues that we're having with pediatric patients. So yeah, safe access is just another huge issue. I think that, in maybe 5 years, you guys are going to have a Psychedelics Today podcast,
Yep.
because really cannabis is really kind of paving the way for a lot of these traditional plant medicines that we're seeing,
I actually think
in certain states that are legal and certain
psychedelics is
patients
going
that
to
are
move
really
a little quicker
beneficial.
than
Right.
cannabis, don't you
And
think?
Steph said that too.
What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I hope that it's not going to, I hope that because cannabis has been kind of paving the way, that it will, but it's just, we're just trying to, we're just getting cannabis destigmatized. And I think, people are scared of psychedelics for good reason as well, because we don't
Right.
have that research, but we're seeing a lot of the same issues,
Right.
from, federal illegality perspective to a healthcare education or lack thereof perspective for psychedelics as well, and entheogens. But we're seeing that, again,
Yeah,
same
I
thing
recently
for mental
attended the
health issues, that it's
Cannadelics
really
event in
beneficial to
Miami.
certain
It's
individuals.
also hosted
Right.
by one of the nurses, and it was amazing the amount of physicians that are investing their time researching and treating their patients with psychedelics. And the patients are happy. I mean, it's a treatment. Basically, they're choosing taking a pill daily to doing 1 or 2 treatments a year. Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, look at the rise of ketamine, right? And I've talked to some people that it really helped them. Not just we did it for pain, but also for their anxiety and their depression, and that kind of blew up. And I think now people are really seeing the benefits of psilocybin, microdosing. I've had some friends talk to me like, "Hey, I actually started microdosing psilocybin." I'm like, "You're people that I would have never guessed in my life are microdosing." So they're like, "I feel phenomenal." I was like, "Wow, I never would have, you know, taken you for micro." They're like, "I love it." So I think it's like you said. I think cannabis really kind of kicked down the door for other things to kind of come through it, and I hope just to get research out there it's so important. Um, so to kind of wrap it up, like what are some things that everyone needs to know about you, about your company, about what you're saying, what you're thinking, and what you're seeing?
Yeah. I think that we're in an amazing time in healthcare, after the pandemic that, we've all gone through as human species. We're seeing new epidemics in the mental health department. I 1 in 3 people, I read a study that had COVID, had a new onset mental health disorder
Wow.
during the time. 1 in 3, that's incredibly significant.
Right.
And we talk about all these epidemics, right? We talk about the opioid epidemic. We talk about a lot of other addiction related epidemics, but there's also a huge epidemic of mental health that's
Right.
really, reared its head. And the fact that, we're just pumping, kids under 25 with SSRIs, these kids that have been isolated. We're, giving people benzodiazepines, a pill to sleep, a pill to wake up in the morning.
Right.
It's not, beneficial. And so, I really think the goal of all cannabis companies, or I'd like to think so, especially, Goodness Growth Holdings, we are the only, physician-founded, physician-led company, is really to improve that safe access and to destigmatize and to really, bring that message that cannabis can be incredibly beneficial and back in everyone's medicine cabinet.
Right.
So I hope, we'll have a formulary cannabis in the ER. We'll really have an OTC version in the CVS and really, make it beneficial.
Suppositories.
We'll have a Stephanie brand. We'll have a Charlie brand for family medicine and women's health, and really be able to, right? Suppositories. Yes, absolutely. Very important. But same with all, plant medicine to really, end that stigma and really begin to heal and improve quality of life.
Right.
Well, I
Yeah. I
actually
think
want to thank you for coming
it's
on
a
the
great
show
message. Steph,
and
what do you think and how to wrap it
sharing
up?
some resources and knowledge. And if you could
Yes.
please tell us where they can reach you.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm such a millennial. Follow me on Instagram, Doctor spelled out DOCTOR_Paloma. Try to post lots of great cannabis content. Would love to hear from you. And yeah, thank you both for having me. This is, what we have needed, and I really hope lots of PAs. Charlie, hope your conference goes
Thank
amazingly,
you.
and just thank you guys for
Thank
paving
you.
the way. I mean,
Yeah.
PAs are really,
Thank
the
you.
peeps. So really
Yeah.
excited that you guys are really going to bring that education to them.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on, and I'm going to post all your contact stuff, in your Instagram stuff and Twitter, in the show notes, in the captions and stuff. So we really appreciate what you're doing, just for the medical field, for all of us, and really the patients, appreciate what you're doing, because without people like you, they're not getting benefits. And so,
With
um,
people like you, they
um,
are getting
so,
appreciate it.
yeah, anyone have questions, you can reach out to us at info@medcanna today. You can reach out to Dr. Paloma. You can reach out to Stephanie. We're here. We're here to answer questions. We're here to, other PAs reaching out, other doctors reaching out. They're scared. I was scared when I first started my CBD company. And so, if you're scared to dip your toe in,
We're here.
reach out to us. We can help you. We can point you in the right direction, tell you the pitfalls to stay away from. But with that, appreciate everyone. Yeah, we're here. We're not going anywhere, and this is not going
Bye.
anywhere. And so, with that, thank you everyone for listening, and have a good evening.